Actually, I guess the beginning of the Red Etra type stuff. And when I got to NET's TV lab, Namjoon Paik and Sri Abe had their video synthesizer. If anyone knows any of this history, it's all very old stuff. I'm not sure anyone cares. But they had their first synthesizer there, and I gutted a black and white TV set and put a color yoke over it, which was Namjoon style. And then somewhere in 1970, I guess, I got or 71, I got a contract from the TV lab because I said I could build a Namjoon Paik synthesizer that zoomed, which it couldn't do. You can't do with distorting with a second yoke. You have to directly control the yoke. And an old friend of mine, Steve Rutt, who had already worked on synchronizing a strobe light to video, so he was building steel inspection strobes. Go on, Feezy Weasel. Go on. Ow! Bite daddy. Nasty weasel. Anyway, and Steve was an electronics engineer. He'd never gone to engineering school. In fact, he hadn't graduated. I don't know if he graduated high school or not, but Steve was, his family had been in the electronics business for years. And he had a plant in, oh God, in New Jersey, on the Jersey side across from New York. He had a plant called Amperite. Steve's uncle did, and Steve had an office in the plant. We were building strobe lights, and I got $3,000 for NET to build a Namjoon Paik synthesizer that zoomed, and Steve and I spent like $10,000 of our own money fulfilling the $3,000 contract. And we built one, which was the first Red Etra. And then we sold one to a man called Jose Ignacio Cadaviego from Venezuela. And we were in the synthesizer business. And we built a second one, because the one we built for NET was no way it was going to go into somebody's studio. And I must say, at this time, there already existed the computer image machine, which is also a scan processor, does the same thing. Basically, plays with the deflection of a picture on a special CRT and picks it up with a second camera. But their machine would barely have fit in this room, would have taken up this whole room. And the one we built for NET was about 2 boxes, about 8.5 or 10.5 inches. One box 10.5 inches and one box 8.5 inches high, standard 19-inch rack mount. Everything was built so it fit in electronics racks at that time. And we thought we were coming out of Namjoon's thing. A later computer image in Denver sued us, actually. It's a long thing, and we settled out of court. And then of every successive Red Etra got 2% or something. So we didn't have any money to fight. We spent, I don't know. Anyway, we let Woody build a Red Etra, gave him all the plans, and let him build one of his own. We did some of it for him, because we did the boards and stuff, because we were making our own printed circuit boards. I laid out all the front panels of the Red Etra. Louise Etra, now Louise Levine of Silicon Graphics, did all the lettering work on the front panels. I spent endless hours learning to be a draftsman, and then learning to etch printed circuit boards and print front panels under anodized layers and stuff like that. We did everything ourselves. And we built about 22, I think, Red Etras finally. Ranging in price from the first one at $3,000 to the ones that are in Australia at $120,000 Australian, it was about, at the time, about $180,000 US, $200,000 US. So we built them at all prices, and a lot of them that went to artists went for the parts cost, basically. So there were quite a few around in schools. I think there are still 4 or 5 working. There's one at California College of Arts and Crafts, which was my machine, which a man named Don Day teaches with still. They still use it every semester. And that was 70, 71, 72, and I was working at the kitchen at night, if you call that work. You have to understand the kitchen then was a black painted ex-kitchen in the back of the Broadway Central Hotel, which eventually collapsed in on itself at some point in the early 70s, before it moved to, was it next Broome Street? And then to its present location on 19th Street on the west side. I'm afraid I'm making noise, am I? Anyway, that's how I got into video. I was seduced by the dark side of the force, by feedback. And when we started building the Red Etra, I thought I was giving me something that gave me total control over the plasticity of the image. I thought next we'd build a simple colorizer. And in the mid-70s, I worked with a man named Bill Hearn, Electronic Associates at Berkeley, who was building a colorizer but didn't have voltage controls on it. And that wound up being the Electronic Associates at Berkeley Video Lab. And I actually, at one point, had to fly to California because Bill understood perfectly how to build electronics equipment, but he didn't understand the use of the voltage control by an artist. So he had taken all the voltage control off the thing, and I couldn't convince him on the phone. So I, at one point in my life, spent my last buck for an airplane ticket to California. After arguing with him all morning, got on the next flight to California, and got to Bill Hearn's house, and it was my younger, more violent days, held him above my head until he promised to put the voltage control back on it. I had talked him into building it by selling 3 of them to friends who taught in schools, who had Red Etras and needed the colorizer. It was a brilliant machine, actually. It had digital detection circuits, and Hearn's a brilliant designer, but he didn't. I think it was 10 years later he finally saw the use of voltage control. Somebody did something live where they put oscillators into the color and made shapes, and then he understood it. But he wasn't a video maker. Well, my biggest argument with Steve Rutt the whole time would be I'd be looking at the screen and the image would be all broken up and the thing wouldn't be working properly, and Steve be looking at the waveform and saying it's fine. It's a funny thing because at some point in 1978, 77, I guess, when I moved to California, I had become the engineer and Steve had gone into video production. Because Red Etra what became Red Video, which was a production house. Steve had bought the early Ampex 1-inch machines, the A style, the Alpha Wrap 1-inch machines. And they were broadcast capable, and he'd gotten a whole load of them from EUE Screen Gems, where we had been the computer animation facility. Lots of stuff happened. And he'd gotten their old 1-inch machines, and he was doing, broadcast capable editing on 1-inch. He was one of the first people in New York to be doing it, but he was maintaining all the machines because he could fix them all. And he'd gotten them because they decided not to use them, really. It was a painful thing. In between that, I'd gone to Ampex at Redwood City and learned videotape engineering. One of Steve's old friends had been George Hartman, who was senior tape editor at CBS. And I guess I'm one of the last people to remember. Lots of people remember cutting half-inch tape with a razor blade. Steve and I are two of the last people around remembering cutting 2-inch videotape with razor blades. And you have to develop out the control track to actually look at it to see where you cut. I mean, it was a different time. I remember Editech coming in. I was at Ampex and taught how to use it at one point, electronic editing. I remember the first CMX editing system at CBS, which was designed to edit only one show.
Bonanza.
No.
Whoops. No.
It was designed. Bonanza is a good guess, but it was designed to edit a much older show, which was the longest running show on television at the time, which was Gunsmoke.
I mean Gunsmoke. I got them mixed up.
It was black and white, right? And it was designed to edit Gunsmoke's whose cut was never longer than 20 seconds. It was designed to edit 20-second cuts. Later, by 1977, I moved to California because I was still in. Steve and I broke up really partially over the split that I thought computers were the way everything was going. And Steve didn't see that or didn't want to build any more tools because we really hadn't been financially successful with the Red Etra. He wanted to go into production. I wanted to go and finish the tool I thought I was building in a year in 1969 or 70. And I'm still building the tool. It's almost 30 years later, or about 30 years later now. And I'm still building the thing I thought I was building then, which I thought of, or I've come to think of over the years. I probably didn't think of it that way then. I just wanted total control of the image. But I think really what I was looking to build and I'm still looking to build is a piano for visuals, which is a much more complex task, let's face it. Whether it's video or 3D holographs or virtual reality, the truth is that the visual spectrum is infrared to ultraviolet and the audio spectrum is 20 cycles to 20,000 cycles. And if they had been started to codify written music when they had audio tape recorders and try to include realistic sounds, they would have had a lot more problems. And I still think we're banging on small instruments. I hope the new Star Wars, where Lucas spent his own money and really has the whole facility, gives you the sort of compositional thing. Though I think Lucas comes out of film and that thinks of it as a narrative storytelling form. And I'm not sure that that's where I think it's going when other people have those tools. But that's the facility I want. Somebody to be able to, an individual to be able to design the equivalent of a visual symphony. And to be able to bang it out with what I call real-time feedback. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about live audience performance. I'm looking for the facility to see and hear and feedback on what you're doing and change it interactively. Just that the audio composer has on the piano, that a music composer has on the piano. I don't think we're there yet. I think we're still banging on things. If Lucas is successful, he will have one large machine which includes 2,000 employees, or 20,000, I forget how many Lucasfilm has, but over 2,000 people who he interacts with who does it. And he's still not controlling the music, and I think that's another part of it. I think video and computer graphics have the ability to be image over time with that real-time feedback. And I think there's another art form there that hasn't come out. And I hope that, well, 2 years ago I lost my leg. Just had the lenses in both eyes replaced, which is actually almost as sensitive as losing the leg, because cataracts were destroying the color vision, which to me is vital. Going well into the next century, I don't know how many of the original parts are coming. I hope I'm around long enough to see us get up to a harpsichord or something, or even a very good guitar. Something that people can compose on, or start to compose on. I think there's another art form there. Do I think I'm ever going to see it? I thought I was in I thought I was going to use it in 1970 or 71. I was sure I was going to have it any day now. It wasn't true. The expectations have increased. Computers in 1975 or 6, I did a thing called computer as a compositional tool for video. That's how early I thought computers were going to do it. That's why I got into small computing. It's why I moved to California, was to work on the 8080, the beginning, the predecessors to the PCs, because I believed that was the way it was going to go, and I still believe that's the way it's going to go. Fiesel put the shoes back in the bedroom. Anyway, the weasels steal its shoes. That's what they did. Anyway.
Do you want me to pause?
Yeah, pause. You didn't like to shoot.
Okay. Can we get you to do your Ling Ling song again?
I'm Ling Ling, I'm little Ling Ling Weasel. I am neat, I'm petite. I got fuzzy, furry feet. I love to dance, I love to prance, I'm always ready for romance. I'm just a little furry girl, just a little furred pearl, a roly-poly panda bear with a coat of long soft hair. All the other great big weasels are in love with Ling Ling Weasel. There's no one I would rather be than wuzzy, fuzzy, little old me. You want to go down, Ling Ling? You want to go? There's Tylar. 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 Who's a little Tylar? Come on. Come on, Tylar. Oh! Down, Ling Ling. Come on, Tylar. Oh, you sneaky weasels. Sneaky weasels. Okay. Come on, Ling Ling. And here's Tylar.
What's Tyler's song?
Well, the poem of the Royal House of Weasel, few are nobler than the Royal House of Fiesel. Tylar is the Silver Prince. What? Anyway. Member of White Ermine clan, born before the dawn of man. Grandson of the Linfen, the polecat queen, petite, majestic, and serene. Member of the Red Eye Lodge, whose sight all enemies must dodge, for beneath his fiery glare they'll bubble, crackle, burn, and flare. His flashing fangs and blazing ruby eyes are what all evil things despise. At the sound of ancient guardian's bell, he'll send the demons slithering back to hell. Right, Tylar? Tylar Weasel of the Royal House. Tylar likes to fight. Tyler likes to fight. Tyler likes to fight. Tyler likes to fight. Fight, fight, fight. He's off to eat.
So, can we go back a little bit?
We go back to 1978, and I moved to California trying to build things. There's actually an article in Popular Electronics. We're going to build, we actually designed a single board video colorizer. And Kier, I got it. And Kier for the Sol Terminal 8080 computer. And I tell you exactly what I was getting paid 1 day a week, with a guarantee of $20,000 a year to work for Processor Tech as their head of video research, their head of design was Lee Felsenstein, who later built the Osborne first portable PC, pre-IBM. And who was head of the Homebrew Computer Club, which met at Stanford Linear Accelerator, along with Roger Mellon, who formed a company called Kromemco, is now head of CCD research at Canon in California. And the other members like Bill Gates and other people we won't discuss. And about 20 or 30 people were members of the Homebrew Club, or that's how many came to the meetings. Somewhere between 11 and 30 came to the meetings. And a guy named Steve Dompierre, who then formed something called Island Graphics, which did a lot of the paint systems for TrueVision, who did a lot of the early video boards. Um, he was head of software, and we actually built the card, but processor technology went out of business when they got the first real floppy disks interfaces to computer, because Verbatim, among other things, was only shipping 1 out of 7 that worked. And there was a new rule, that and a mechanical error in the design of the box for the disks, which would skew them off when you tighten them into the box. Company went from something to many $1 million a year in 2 years, and then totally went out of business. They built one of the first computers that looked like a little typewriter. And they had the vision to hire me to do a real-time video card that would have fit in it. At the time, I had also been hired by a group of Australians to do a 3D television system, which is a long, long story, which I won't go into the details of, but I got a patent. And I made quite a lot of money that year. I think I built something like $250,000 in 1978 or 79. And then lost whatever I'd made trying to make a real-time video processing set of boxes that plugged into the Radio Shack 8080 computer. Still trying to build the same machine. There was one set. There were 3 sets built. One still is probably at California College of Arts and Crafts. I'm not sure. One of the boxes for it is sitting somewhere over here, probably in one of the corners, keeping the weasels out. And that set of boxes, you could say it was an early thing similar to the video toaster. It took real-time video in and digitally processed it out. It had 4 channels, RGB, 4 bits each, which is actually fairly decent. One alpha channel possible, and it was a set of long black boxes that were supposed to fit in the Radio Shack. And I built a very large video box for the Australians to do the 3D, which is a trick. It's a long, complex story, but it's a trick where you look at what direction something's moving in and you put the color fringing. It's supposed to be anaglyphic 3D because they had another system that had to be compatible with. That's a long story. Anyway, at about that time, I also got commissioned to do a thing on the occasion of the old Emperor Hirohito's birthday in the Budokan in Tokyo. And at that time I had 4 companies, and before the show at the Budokan, like a week before the show at the Budokan, I was in LA finishing things up, and I had an ulcer attack and wound up in the hospital. And never saw the show at the Budokan, which was with Tomita, the Japanese synthesizer artist, and was sick for quite some time. My knees had already gone from playing judo, so it was a combination of things, and I basically lost all 4 companies. Louise and I, that's a long story. Long story, but that bankrupted me at that time. And so, in the aftermath of having broken up with my wife of, 12 or 14 years, or my companion of 12 years, and losing the companies and stuff, I went and got involved with Video West, which was a volunteer group doing video. That's where the rock and roll videos and things like that come in. And that was about 20 years ago. I don't know, I just, and that was sort of a recovery period, and after that I went off, what did I do next? I moved to New York and talked Warner Atari Labs into a project that became the only project I think that survived the labs that became digital FX, the T-chip for digital effects. I talked them into that.
What's the T-chip?
It was basically a digital Etra. It's a set of what are called digital differential analyzers, and it does all the Etra effects digitally. But when I was at the labs, I was trying to talk them into putting it into a PC, an Atari computer, and making it cheap. Then they decided to build a big, very expensive machine, which became the DFX machine. But I still, I was trying for the same thing. I always try for the same thing. I just try at different places at different times to build different parts of it. I decided somewhere in 1976, before I moved to California, that arts grants were never going to pay enough money what was required to go to the digital thing. And a lot of things have been influenced. I've had some influence. Mike Ogrins, who designed the ADO, used the Etra. It's a friend of Dean Winkler's, who's now head of Post Perfect, and he had used the Etra. So I've influenced some things. Whether I've actually gotten anything done is a good question. I'm not sure. I've had some influence in getting towards the machine, but that's not important. At some point, if you really want to, you got to put up with two things if you see a future that's not quite there yet. And the two things are, one, you have to realize that you're not going to be the one who's good at the machine. Gary Hill's much better, did things with the Etra. It's actually the first time I saw anything done with the Etra that I hadn't conceived of being done with it was Gary Hill's work, his poetry using the Etra. You have to understand that at some point, if you become a tool maker, you sort of have to realize that you're not going to be the best one using the machine. Most of the work on the Budokan project, with the exception of short things, I designed the screen and the display system. Howie Gutstadt did a lot of the visuals. Peter Crown, a man named Tom Zafian. It's at some point, if you get into tool making, I realize two things. One is there are three stages of invention. One is you're crazy, that can't be done. The next is, oh, that's interesting, and everybody wants to figure out how to profit by it, and you get a lot of offers to do various things. And the next stage is, well, everybody knew that was going to happen. It's the way things are. It's the human nature, really. So I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I went on to personal history is not exactly a wonderful thing to consider after all these years. The Warner Atari Labs closed when Warner Brothers started to lose money all of a sudden. Steve Mayer went off, and the next time I saw him at Digital Effects, and I told him I wanted to do some software for the new chip, which he'd already built. He told me no, he didn't need me because they had so many ideas from when I was at Warner Atari. It'd take them years to get up to the point where they'd even want to talk to me again. So you see, things get, it's not the easiest road, and I'm not sure, and I went on and off it. Warner Atari closed, and I called an old friend. I'd done some jobs when I was in California consulting for a man named Bill Butler and another man named Bill Fink. Bill Butler was the founding president of CMX and had become head of Fernseh, division of Bosch, the video division of Bosch, which was in Salt Lake City, and Bill Fink had been the vice president of sales, and he had moved on, and he knew of a company in Vancouver that was trying to do digital, a 3D modeling hardware and software solution, and they unfortunately had decided it was going to be $200,000 a box, Canadian or US, I forget which. At the time, Canadian dollars worth about 75 or 80 cents on the US dollar. And I went up to Canada because I needed work, and I talked them into building what became the Vertigo system, and I hired people, a lot of whom were very good young people out of Cornell and other schools. And with about 20 people hired, we spent about, well, I was there, about $250,000 building the Vertigo system, which then was bought by Alias. We built both hardware and software. And it was a faster rendering engine, which I don't think was such a good idea in retrospect, but a software thing that was hopefully easier for artists to use. And according to Gary Yost, who did 3D Studio, it's one of the predecessors of 3D Studio, so that had some influence again. But was the system successful? Not particularly. I mean, the Red Etra wasn't financially successful. None of it's been financially successful. Has it influenced? Yeah. And the only thing I really made a lot of money on was my consulting or doing things like stupid 3D TV systems, which I didn't think they should build, because I don't think 3D television works until you fill your living room with the image. Because while you get your feeling of solidity from binocular vision, you get your feeling of being there from how much of your peripheral vision's filled, and that requires 100+ degrees of screen, so you can't do impressive 3D on a small screen system. That's why IMAX and OmniMax work even when don't have flashing glasses. And I had told them that, but they had some scheme in Australia and they wanted it done, so it got done. It never got implemented. Anyway, I spent a year in Canada, and then the president of the company and I weren't getting along. I'm a very bad employee, and I moved back to the States, and I worked with a company called Time Arts, who did the Lumina paint system years ago. And I worked on some of their video stuff, and they were up in Santa Rosa, and I was living in San Francisco, so that was Gloria and I, my second wife, Gloria and I were living in San Francisco. So we worked on Time Arts for a while, and then Bill Butler had gone from Fernseh to Lucasfilm, had been brought in by Lucas to turn around DroidWorks. And I got a job spending about 7-8 months designing a new. See, Bill knew something DroidWorks hadn't. You see, he'd been first president of CMX. You know, no company just doing video editing systems had ever been financially successful. The only thing that was financially successful were character generators and special effects engines for television. So he hired me, and we designed basically a special processor, systolic array processor, with some people I knew who were already there. Some people named Bob and Shree, and then another guy named Paul Fucher, and who already had designs for small parts of it. And we designed a thing, and he had talked Fernseh, which he had still had good relationships with, to be the marketing end for it. And then Fernseh was bought by Philips. The Dutch screwed the Germans on the International Monetary Instrument. They lost their discretionary marketing funds. They lost about 20% on the conversion from Guilder to Deutschmarks. That was their discretionary marketing fund. They called Butler and told him they couldn't market it. Without an external marketing department, the company couldn't succeed, and Butler did what he was paid to do and closed DroidWorks the day the parts were in layout on the circuit boards for the new machine. So, some parts of that machine that weren't proprietary wound up as accelerators for AutoCAD. I had some relationship with the company doing that. Then a venture firm came to me and wanted to start a company. There was once a company called Computer Vision, which built all the stuff, at one time manufactured more color computer displays than any company in the world. Sold Boeing $300 million worth of the stuff that designed, unfortunately, the DC, well, not the DC, yeah, DC-10, I guess. Boeing DC-10. That's why I never fly a DC-10. It's the first computer designed airplane, and I know how bad the design system was. Too young, still too young. It's not that it doesn't get there, it's that Gloria asked me why I don't want to, I have a bad back, and Gloria asked me why I don't want to get involved in experiments for fixing damaged spines. The answer is, if you've ever done anything experimental, you know better than to get involved in a true experiment. You know the difference between development and research? Development is something that's close enough to what's going on that you can actually tell how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. Pure research is open-ended and infinite. Because if you're really doing something that's not related to anything else, there's no way of telling how long it's going to take or what it's going to cost. So if you really want to do research, there's no telling. And it's not dependent on you, it's dependent on other things. What's going to happen. If you ever think that you have a control over how things develop, remember that there's always somebody in his garage thinking of something new on a totally different track that may change the way things work. That's why I don't think what machine implements it is important. I think what the machine does is important. How it's implemented is, how you get the effect is important. Whether you use a piece of string to do the visual effect, or you do it on a billion-dollar computer, or you do it on a home computer, isn't important. It's getting the effect you want or getting the device you want. So if George Lucas finally can compose symphonies, which is what it looks like he was doing in a 60-minute interview about Star Wars, the prequel to Star Wars, then he's built the machine. And only worry about the uses and the applications and the facility of the machine, and worry about making it cheaper. Don't worry about how it's implemented. The implementation changes. In my first four or 5 years that I was learning electronics by building machines, when I didn't know anything, and I'm reading books infinitely. We went from DTL, diode transistor logic, to resistor transistor logic, I'm not getting this right, to emitter coupled logic, to CMOS, MACMOS, ECL, ECL, and it just kept changing. Medium scale, low scale integration, medium scale integration, large scale integration. The world changes continually. The only advantage I probably have is I never was in a stable enough world to think I didn't have to start over again to do something. This is getting very disjointed, I'm sorry. Anyway, so DroidWorks closed. I got some involvement with a company in Arizona that I visited on occasion that was doing it. I never lasted with a company. I think Vertigo in Canada was probably the longest, and I think that was about a year, and I think the last third of the year I was mostly out of the company, running around with Paul Wong and the video artists in Vancouver, because my job was essentially done. It was set, and I was no longer in a position to be. I was vice president of research and development for a while. But I don't do well in a corporate environment. I'm too disruptive. Which is, you know, what are my advantages? Attention deficit disorder, high IQ attention deficit disorder, and an inability to believe that I can't do anything I want. This describes both the world's worst troublemaker and just about every artist I know. So it's one way or the other. It's not a matter of lack of discipline, because in some ways I've worked endless hours on things, Well, anyway, when I came back at some point from California, after all of that, I came back, my leg was in bad shape, and it was operated on several times until I finally lost it. I had broken my ankle in Vancouver, and it got worse and worse, and they finally found that I had a damaged spine from something internal, possibly from throwing myself around in judo and rolling around on the streets of New York and stuff when I was young and thought I was invulnerable. So I'd come back to New York. I wasn't doing anything. I went out to see a friend called Harvey Dubner, who was actually the first man to do computer graphics for television, really. His company had just been bought by Grass Valley, which was a division of Tektronix, and I wanted them to build a machine, yet another version of the machine, and this one was to store stuff on large video discs, only not in the standard editing form. One of my big arguments at DroidWorks had been I didn't want the new edit droid to use timecode. Well, all the editors know timecode and gray code and yellow code and all the code numbers. I wanted it to become heuristic, which means a learning system, and I wanted it to be based on people labeling the shots. I think it's an enormous, there are some people who can edit perfectly on timecode. There are lots of very good editors, but I think it limits the type of person who can become an editor. I think to some extent in film, where you put up each little clip, and you may put the edge numbers down, but people really put file clips, I think, in film. I mean, I taught by Scorsese. I've watched Coppola edit. I watched him do some of the editing on Black Stallion. I watched him do the end of Apocalypse Now 19 times or so. I worked for Coppola somewhere in the middle there, about the time he gave the speech on the Deer Hunter about the future of technology. Anyway, one of the big arguments I had at Edit-Droid was that I thought people should have a different. And I came back here and somebody hired me to look into video jukeboxes. And it occurred to me that we really had the technology for expensive, but the idea for that machine was really to take a set of, it's one of the reasons I have all these files in the background of film libraries. It occurred to me that all the stuff that's done on World War II is done from a film library that we pretty much all have seen a million times. But it's still relatively interesting if the narrative changes. You can watch World at War and then watch a PBS or a History Channel documentary now on Hitler or this, and if they put the things, arrange it right, it's watchable. It occurred to me that it would be useful to have a film library that actually responded to a written scenario